right. I think my theme song wanted a little bit longer time of for itself. All right, so Trump just attended a major summit in China, and this was not some small diplomatic photo op, guys. He brought with him 30 of some of the most major American leaders in terms of CEOs and business executives. And from what I've been reading, the amount of economic influence represented on that trip was massive. So, and it depends on the outlet that you're reading. You're going to get a lot of different, opinions and a lot of different interpretations of that, the overall arching outcome of that summit. But some are going to say that nothing major took place and no measurable results. But of course, take that with a grain of salt because, as you know, our media is extremely biased. Then there's other reportings that are saying that there actually was a very strategic framework being discussed involving tariffs and trade, manufacturing, American workers, farming, national security, and how the U.S. plans to deal with China moving forward. So I want to break this down carefully because I think this goes beyond just tariffs, and I'm not going to sit here pretending that I'm like some foreign policy expert or Secretary of State, but I'm a regular American woman who has done her research, and I've looked into for this episode. I'm going to bring to you what I've been diving into, which is basically a lot more of the historical context between our relationship with China, because I feel like that sets us up for where we are today and why Trump is probably taking the approaches he's currently taking with China. And I think it's significant when I look at the history. I'm going to bring all that to you guys to kind of just jog. I want to jog some of our creative flow on what this relationship could look like and what guardrails we need to put in place to protect ourselves, and so on and so forth. So I want to start with this article from Reuters. So Reuters reported that the US and China are discussing tariff reductions on what they call non-sensitive goods. These are like some of the stuff that we've seen Trump talk about when it came to China: beef, soybeans, things like that, agriculture. They're not basically anything related to like military technology or national security. It's far from that area. But this is some like $30 billion in goods where tariffs could be reduced without crossing national security red lines. But the key line from Reuters that this plan avoids pushing China to change its economic model. And I think this is going to be key. I want you guys to keep that phrase in mind as we go through this episode and we dissect this portion of what's taking place in our nation, because I think that wording is very important when you look at past administrations and what they have done in their dealings with China. This does not mean, though, that Trump he no longer wants China to open up, because he's constantly said that. I've recently seen him on Sean Hannity, where he reiterated that he wanted China to open up. That was his main aim when it came to farming and manufacturing, that side of things. And that was, I think, a huge topic of theirs in their discussion. So that's definitely, a point of I want to say concern, but definitely a point for the negotiation. But I think the real distinction is that Trump is not abandoning the pressure on China, because in that same interview, he mentioned that he still has a 20% tariff on China, but he's just changing the target of the pressure. So instead of China, us pushing for China to become more of a Western style free market economy like we saw done in the past, and we'll dissect that history coming up. What the approach is that it appears to be is that he wants China to, keep your same system, because as we've seen in the past, when we try to change that, it hurt us. But America is going to demand better access. We're going to demand better trade terms and more purchases of American goods and firm boundaries around national security. That seems to be the approach under the America First, and that makes the major difference. So America's not going to waste its time trying to remake China from the inside. But if China wants access to America markets and a stable trade relationship, then China needs to buy American. Open access where possible, respect our national security lines, and make deals that benefit American workers, manufacturers, and farmers. That is the strongest analysis that I think I kind of draw up when I went through this. And just to give you guys a little bit of context, I am going to break this down, like I mentioned, historically, and then we're going to paint that into what's taking place nowadays. However, with all that being said, I do have a special guest that's going to join me and give his perspective as well in that, and just give us more observation from his point of view. And Mike, I want to bring you in here because I think this is a huge conversation. So when you look at this summit and everything surrounding it, we're going to talk about, I want to know what stands out to you most. So Mike, thanks so much for joining me today. Mike is the podcast host of The Insurrection. He's also CEO of Ex American News, which I'm currently broadcasting on right now. So I want to bring him in. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me again. And yeah, I mean, I think this has mostly been good news, but as like you and I were discussing off air, China isn't like a lot of other countries. You can't really trust them to the same extent you can other more friendly nations or allied nations. So that's the thing. But again, I think Trump will be out ahead of that. But the other big takeaway that I have on this is a lot of what we've seen Trump's foreign policy moves be so far, especially accelerating over the last 6 months with Venezuela and then Iran and other countries, has been putting pressure on countries that are friendly to China, especially the ones that are supplying their fuel, their oil, natural gas, and rare earth minerals, things like that. Well, now we see that China is now going to be buying a large amount of their oil and fuel from the United States. So we were able to
Mm-hmm.
leverage that into something that'll be financially beneficial to us here and also beneficial to China, because as I think we've discussed on here before, especially after we went into Iran, like they've been basically crippled. About 25% of their oil supply, again, depends on who you read, who you believe, but somewhere between 20 and 25% after cutting off Venezuela and cutting off Iran. They've had major problems internally. A lot of their plastics manufacturers have had to shut down because it isn't just fuel that we get from oil. It's a lot of other necessary components that are used to manufacture goods that all of us use all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So this also gives us a certain element of control over them. If they're now buying from us, they're going to probably be a little more likely to be compliant with the trade deals and other things. There'll be less obfuscation there, less tariff evasion. And again, we're not like we're asking for anything unreasonable with the tariffs, the trade, or anything else. What we're asking them to do is to live up to their end of the bargain. We want a fair deal. We want fair trade. We don't want China to continue taking advantage of us because because they have access to essentially slave labor, where they pay even where they are paying people, it's way below market rates like you'd have in other countries. They're able to produce
Mm-hmm.
goods at a fraction of the cost here in the U.S. Again, they don't have a lot of the same safety regulations, the unions, the other things that we have to deal with here that drive up the costs on a lot of these. So you've had a lot of U.S. manufacturing go overseas.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully, what we're doing now is trying to bring more of that back, including possibly some Chinese companies. But again, like you and I were discussing, we do have to watch them like a hawk because
Yes.
with businesses they already have here now, we've had numerous examples just this year of them either stealing trade secrets or getting involved and trying to steal government secrets, sending spies over or turning people that are already here into spies for China. So we're going to have to watch things very closely, but I do think it's largely good news.
I think so too. And he also, at least in that interview with Sean Hannity, President Trump mentioned that Boeing as well would be, I think, 200. Um, oh gosh, is it planes or
Yeah, 200 commercial aircraft.
commercial aircraft? Thank you. That they have already worked at, and if, as he said, if Boeing does a great job, that could move up to 750. So it does seem like there's some things that did come out of this. I feel like the media is slightly trying to downplay this, but they have said that they're not making the other major issues like Iran the top topic of everything. They did discuss Taiwan as well, which is a major concern there too.
Yeah.
Um, but I love what you said that we do have to watch them when it comes to trade. And then in that same interview, Trump mentioned that he was going to open up for China and allow them to have businesses here. And then the thing that also needs to be mentioned is that they do have state-backed businesses. So basically,
Yep.
we allow our businesses to succeed and to fall. They don't do that necessarily. They will, you know, do sanctions. They will do all these different things. They'll fund them in different ways and all of that to make sure that those businesses succeed in the foreign market, even though that business might be falling, until it's able to succeed so that they could crush the competition. And I think
Yes.
that's where the unfair trade comes in, and that's how they have been able to succeed. It's kind of unfair on that part because it doesn't play by the same rules as everybody else that are trading. Even
Yeah.
though you might have a different economy, there are shared rules when it comes to this international trade thing. So, and they haven't followed that, and it's been to our detriment and their benefit.
Well, in a
I
lot
don't
of the
know.
worlds, especially in industries that they've highly subsidized, like the solar industry is a good example of this. There's hardly any U.S. solar manufacturers or any around the world now. There's a few that have survived, but a lot of that's because China spent the last 5 to 10 years highly subsidizing that industry, so you could produce solar panels and other things in China at a fraction of the cost here because the government was picking up as much as 30% of the tab. Some, I guess, in some cases even more than that. But it was basically
Mm-hmm.
to crush foreign companies producing the same products. Another thing with China and unfair trade practices, so like a U.S. company can go open a factory in China, but that immediately exposes them. All their trade secrets, everything else, have to be handed over to the CCP. So they
Mm-hmm.
have
Hmm.
access, and that's how you end up with generics or knockoffs of a lot of products almost immediately. Now, if you're
Wow.
big, if you're Apple, and it's the iPhone, yeah, they're stealing your technology, and it's going out to all these generic Androids that they produce, but you're big enough, and you're selling on your brand where it doesn't affect you, but it really hurts small manufacturers. I'll give you a little tiny example of this. Like, I know a guy that owns a machine company out of Columbus here that had a design for a wrench, something new and innovative. And before he could even bring the product to market, because he had hired a Chinese company to produce some of the parts, they had generics with his exact same design already up on Amazon for sale before he sold one unit. And
Wow.
luckily, he did not go out of business when this happened, but he came this close to it. And again, it's not a big, something like that's not a huge deal economically for the US. But when this happens over and over and over again, where you're stealing
Copyright infringement.
innovation, yeah,
Yeah. And this is
that's,
what I called out too when I was on TikTok. So if you guys know, my platform originated on TikTok and then moved over. But this is something I called out when we had the whole oh gosh, there was a whole debacle that took place where Chinese markets were exposing like Louis Vuitton and all these high name brand um, manufacturers, and they were telling them their trade secrets and basically saying you can buy from us. This is when Trump was doing the tariffs on China and like crushing their economy. So
yeah,
these, what stood out to me was, we have these laws, we have these morals, these values, where it's like you can't just copy somebody else's work, right, and claim it's your own, or and so what I was looking at was, how can you be a Chinese manufacturer? Even if I were like Chinese, I'm thinking about this from a moral standpoint. Like, if I've been working with, like, say, Louis Vuitton, for example, for 47 years, I have produced with them, I've worked with them, we got a relationship, etc. And then all of a sudden, when my government decides to do something, or the American government decides to do something, and it affects our relationship, I immediately turn on that partner who has nothing to do with it and say, hey, I can make the same thing for you over here, but for cheaper. I'm undercutting them. That's copyright infringement, and it's wrong.
yeah,
So I called this out. One of my videos on TikTok like blew up because I was fearless in calling this out. I was just so upset. Like, I'm not saying that these companies are great. That's not the point. Okay, I'm not saying that they don't work in some maybe devious ways where there might be some Chinese workers that are maybe accepted wages that are lower. I'm not saying that. Okay, what I was focusing on was the fact that if you have this person who made that product, they designed it, they hand it over to you under certain agreements, and then you undercut them at the most convenient time or the most stressful time for you. That's not right. And I was, and I'm like, but again, that's a whole different country, so it's hard to hold them to those same standards. And I was upset with that because there were some manufacturers in China that were telling Americans, we're a consumeristic nation. So if you can find, and some of us, I feel like, don't we're just in it for ourselves in a sense, and we don't realize
yeah,
how much this affects. And not every single company they were calling out was an American owned company, okay? But still, the same rules should apply, should the same morals. Like, you didn't design that, okay? Don't pretend like you did. So it's like, but I saw a lot of people in the comment section of these people that were going live on TikTok, and Chinese people going live on TikTok, selling out their, the company or they're working for, and saying, yeah, here's our WhatsApp number, we can get it to you. And of course, the shipping would take forever because we had their ships were stopped in the UGC, but they were getting it for much cheaper. And some of them were like, oh, this is awesome, I'm getting I'm gonna get a name brand thing for this amount of price. And I'm just like, well, people, wake up. Like, do
yeah,
you understand? And their argument was really stupid. It was kind of like, well, they don't care about us, they just take our money, and they're selling it for this amount, this price or whatever. And I'm like, but you agreed to buy it for that price. Like, you don't have to buy it. Like,
yeah,
like, anyways, there's so much more nuance in that. Like, they made it, they can sell it for how they want. How would you feel if somebody took your stuff, like, and just said that they made it, and you're the one who put the hard-earned money in creating this thing, getting it patented and shipping it all over to the world, for somebody to just undercut you on the market? Like, that's not okay. But anyways, yeah, I went in on that on my video. But the same thing, what we just mentioned, that's a risk that we take with China. And we talk about this historical context too, of getting to the WTO as well, because I want to bring that into the conversation.
yeah. And real quick, to kind of like back up your point you were just making. Like, again, let's just give an example here. Like, if the Toyota plant in the U.S., all of a sudden the U.S. government was allowing General Motors to come in, look at all their designs, go through their machines, figure out, I don't know, some innovative new car parts that they had, something that was setting them apart in the market. And then our government was allowing a direct competitor to come in and duplicate that. This would be a huge international issue. Like that kind of stuff doesn't go on, the corporate espionage, the way it does in China. Not at least not where the government is the one that's facilitating it. And with a lot of these, like the knockoff handbags, stuff like that, the high fashion items, I saw some of these TikTok videos. I know we talked about them at least once, where they had people literally saying, like, "Yeah, we produce the Gucci stuff right over here, and then we're literally using the same material. You're getting the exact same product.
Yeah.
We're duping their logos. It's all going to be exactly the same, but you can buy it through this account here for 25% of what it would normally cost you to buy it through Gucci or Prada or whoever."
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. It's just intellectual property theft. But unfortunately, like you said, too, there's a lot of people that just don't care. I mean, that's why there's always going to be a market for knockoff bags down at, New York Port Authority and wherever. It's always going to exist, but it was not pushed on the mainstream. Like they weren't saying, hey, don't buy the company that we produce all the goods for. Instead, buy our knockoff and save yourself money. They were never so direct about it until then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. I think that that revealed another vulnerability too. This is, I mean, I think this is great that we can see the vulnerabilities because then we can make the adjustments we need to make sure it doesn't happen in the future.
Yeah.
Um, Let me get to the historical context, guys, because I did some deep diving into this because I wanted to come up with my own analysis and observation of what could potentially result as this relationship with Trump that he's taking, plus the fact that it's such a different approach. So when we look at, let me start with this. When we look at the Republican Party, for example, and we there's this thing of we don't want ever forever wars and things like that, and Republicans were looked at this warmongering type party as well. Trump comes in with a whole different approach. Like there's so many different things that doesn't tie him into the mold of the traditional way that that party's ran. And this is another one, I think. So as you remember from Trump's first term, what we could see from his character and the way he was running was that he was somebody that operated at warp speed, right? Like he wanted to get it done. Why is it delayed? And if you revealed any incompetence, like we saw with NATO too, then he would start to rethink that relationship or rethink that strategy or that institution, right? And this is what we see with WTO. And I want to bring this into the conversation because one of the things that was talked about inside of that summit was, and I don't think it's established yet, but this was what was mentioned. They talked about having a board of trade and a board of investments, and you can find this in Reuters. They dropped an article on this between China and the US, which I think would be extremely strategic considering the fact, like what Mike said, they operate very distinct from other nations. So I'm going to break this down from my notes so that way we can go through this under each administration to see what's happened, how do we get to this point, and then we can draw some conclusions as to where we think Trump is probably headed with the deal with China. So in 20 you had in 2000 and 2001 the U.S. granted China PNTR, which is permanent normal trade relations, which means basically they brought China into the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and that happened under the Clinton administration. Now, if you read the 1997 to 2001 Department of State article, they hyped this relationship up. They made it seem like all of the guardrails that we need will be put in place. And if we bring China in, it's going to be great for manufacturers. It's going to be great for farming. It's going to be great for our workers. We're going to have more jobs. And if we don't do that, we're going to suffer as a result because China could go to the Europeans, etc. And they talked about us opening the markets, allowing China in, and China has wanted to be a part of the WTO too. And so this was the initial beginning stages of that. So China does come in it. And at this time, like I mentioned, this was framed as like a major win for America. I think I want to read for you guys even a portion of that article. So here it says the accession agreement negotiated with China will benefit American businesses, workers, and farmers by slashing industrial and agricultural tariffs and opening up sectors across the board to foreign competition. At the same time, the agreement will enhance our ability to ensure fair trade and to protect against import surges and unfair pricing. In addition, China will be subject to strong new WTO enforcement mechanisms to ensure that it lives up to the commitments it has made. The agreement will help promote reform in China. Like I mentioned, in the past, we were going after this Western style free market economy and pushing China into that, and that does not result and end up hurting us. What we don't see Trump doing that. Let me start again here. The agreement will help promote reform in China, stability in the Asia Pacific region, and advance American national security interests. Now, Mike, I'll bring you in later on this, but whether that was some type of naivety or there were some type of spin there so that we can jump into this relationship and some certain people in our Senate benefited from it more than others, I do not know. But the way that they framed this entire article, it just seemed like that they had all the guardrails in place. They knew that China could operate unfairly, but they said that they would have strong, all that stuff would be taken care of. But what we saw was a lot of loopholes inside of the WTO that China ended up taking advantage of, which I'm going to get into.
Yeah.
And then we also saw that they weren't honoring their commitments at all. And the
Yes.
issue with, and I'm kind of skipping, but the issue with the WTO was that this was a major institution, carrying all of the world's trade. And so they were so backed up in dealing with different cases that by the time the US brought a case to them about about what China was doing to our market, the damage would have already been done because it took too long to get to us. So
Yeah.
that was one of the incoherence or incompetence of the WTO in that form. And I feel like that's the reason why Trump is talking about doing a board of trade and a board of investment directly with China because he knows they have operated unfairly in the past and he's not about to repeat that.
Yeah. Real quick with the WTO, you have to ask
Yeah.
yourself though, is that a bug or is that a feature? Because I mean, I think it's that way by design. They want to give extra room. They don't want to address the problem too quickly. They want China to be able to get away with it for a while. Um, so,
Mm,
is it really a bug or is it a feature? I think this is by design. Because again, I think the World Trade Organization, unfortunately, is like one of these organizations you can't really trust, kind of like the World Health Organization or others. Like they have their agenda and we have ours, and their agenda does not necessarily line up with ours or with protecting America's interest. I don't
mhm.
think they're as bad as the World Health Organization, but still. To get further into what you're saying, like yeah, I think having a board or some a direct agreement between the two countries for consequences and enforcement is far better than having an outside globalist organization in the middle. Because, well, just like with the World Health Organization, the people put in charge of these are going to be a lot more susceptible and easier to influence by China than ours because they have the globalist worldview, whereas we have more of an America first worldview that looks out for our own interest. But sorry, go ahead.
No, it's good. Thank you. So the belief basically in Washington was that if China joins the global rules-based system, China will gradually become more market-oriented, more open, and easier to trade with fairly. But then we move into 2001 through 2008, China imports surged, and we see American manufacturing begin to feel that pressure. Many American industries and communities took serious hits as China rapidly expanded its manufacturing dominance. Now, to be fair, this was not because America did absolutely nothing. Like I mentioned, under Bush and Obama, these administration they did file the WTO complaints. Okay, and that was I think mainly the biggest thing that they did there. I think every single administration realized and brought to the forefront that China was taking advantage of us. Okay, and many other nations, but no one did it. No one curbed this as strategically and as harshly as Donald Trump because it comes with major backlash too, as we've seen. But the WTO process was incredibly slow, like we mentioned. China violated and exploited trade rules. A case could be filed and it took forever. Secondly, China wanted access to global markets, but not a full Western style economic transformation. China accepted many WTO commitments, but according to repeated reports from the US Trade Representative, China's compliance record was often poor, and China did not fully embrace the open market model many WTO members expected. At the same time, China's state directed economic model was moving faster than US enforcement. So
Yep.
then China uses these subsidies, these state owned banks, state owned enterprises, cheap land, industrial planning, and export advantages to rapidly build dominant industries. The US Trade Representatives has repeatedly described many of China's non market policies as harmful to American workers and businesses. Then we get to 2008 to 2016, and I'll let you comment. Concern inside the United States continued growing, but enforcement still relied heavily on the WTO complaints. I believe Obama did attempt to do other pressures outside of the WTO complaint. What he tried to do is a trade strategy and international framework where he tried to kind of curve China out of it. Again, it really doesn't have as much effect as what we see with Trump. And that's when we get to 2017 and 2020. And kudos to Biden when we get there, but he literally kept on some of the same things that Trump initiated in his first term. But Trump takes office, and we see a major shift happen. Instead of waiting on the WTO, instead of any other thing, tariffs.
Yep. So you got to hit them where it actually hurts in their
Mm-hmm.
bank account, or they will not learn
Yeah.
their lesson.
So we see that instead of trusting the international institutions alone to discipline China, Trump begins using direct economic pressure. And whether you agree with that tactic or not, this was a major break. Okay, the old consensus we saw in Washington. So then from 2021 through 2026, Biden keeps many of Trump's tariffs in place, which I said, like, kudos to him, and adds stronger technology restrictions tied to national security concerns. Now, in Trump's second term, the framing appears even more focused on direct leverage, market access, trade purchases, and national security boundaries, rather than trying to fully transform China's economic system. So you see, Trump is just, he's already recognized it's not working for us to try to make them follow the rules or try to make them become a Western style free market society. They are not going to do that. And if we do go after that, it's going to crush our economy because
Yep.
they are not playing on the same level field. So then he comes in and put the tariffs on, and then now we're at this place where, like I mentioned, it looks like we're going to move from the WTO, who's slow balling and allowed a lot of there's a lot of uh, areas where China took advantage of, and gaps in the framework there. So we moved to this board of trade and board of investments. So I think I was looking at wondering who would work if we do, like I mentioned, the board of trade and the board of investments is not necessarily established. Okay, this is something that they have, I think, discussed moving forward as they put China in place to trade and like and bring companies over here from China, etc. And I was wondering, who do we think would probably run the board of trade and the board of investments? Because it seems like a more direct relationship strategically with China and the US. So we can clearly see if there's anything major happening that could crush our economy and curve it before the damage is done, like we saw at the WTO. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Well, obviously, we're going to put Marco Rubio on it because we put him on everything else. Now, um, I don't know who the best person for that would be offhand. But it needs to be somebody that's very skeptical of China, not unfairly so, but somebody that does approach it with the proper amount of distrust. Trust but verify, I guess, would be a good way to put it. But a lot of what we have seen with China's trade policy, you know, there's a great book out there. It's called Unrestricted Warfare. It was written by some of China's generals wargaming against the United States and the rest of the world. And part of that is economic warfare. That is taking advantage of being able to mass produce cheap goods with slave labor and destroy the economies of other nations overseas over time. Because again, their industries will disappear. If all of a sudden you can buy your widget from China for 25% less than you can produce it within your own country, that gradually those industries will disappear. So it's a way of unbalancing your enemy, causing internal turmoil and all that. And actually, I can't remember if General Flynn, Boone Cutler's book, Fifth Generation Warfare, gets into this also. I'm trying to think of the name of Gordon Chang's book, where he discusses specifically like the economic warfare in China. When we take a break, I'll go take a look at the title because I've got it on a shelf in the other room. But anyway,
Okay.
a lot of this goes back to, we actually kind of have to like wind the clock back to the Clinton years, actually. So everybody remembers all the Bill Clinton money laundering from China. Several people of his associates went to jail for it. Sorry, I just pulled up some of their names. Johnny Chung admitted $35,000 in illegal contributions to Clinton's campaign, more donations to DNC, $300,000 provided the campaign. John Huang, former Lipo Group executive, DNC chair, funneled millions into the DNC. Charlie Tree, Arkansas friend of the Clintons, who's convicted of funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal contributions into Clinton's legal defense, the DNC. And James Rady, a billionaire, $8.6 billion or $1 million in illegal foreign contributions. That was the largest at the time. I think that was the one they ran through a lot of these Buddhist monks in California to filter their donations into the party. During that same time, what China was getting in the return is we were basically nobody was watching the cookie jar. They were building up this where they built up a lot of they made this change from building cheap plastic garbage in China to real products that people would use. This is what allowed them to kind of overtake a lot of these markets and do the economic damage they did beginning in the early 2000s when Bush and a lot of other people were more focused on terrorism, on Islam, and the expanding threat there following 9/11, which is pretty understandable. But
Mm-hmm.
this isn't something that happened overnight. The big difference is Trump actually put his foot down and said, no, this isn't going to happen any longer. You're not going to keep ripping us off. You're not going to steal products, intellectual property that are made here. I mean, and the big one I remember in the 90s, or the late 90s, was that China was producing all these music and media, knockoff CDs and other things, and they were winding up here. And I even remember them like, oh, yeah, we're going to crack down on this. And they had a big public display where they brought out a bulldozer and they ran over all these DVDs and CDs that were bootlegs that were going on over there and then getting sent to the U.S. Like that was the focus. But in reality, they were building into the manufacturing giant that they are today. Because like, make no mistake, China, yeah, some of the stuff is still knockoff garbage that's not very good, but a lot of things that come out of China now like are pretty high quality. They're good stuff. A lot of major manufacturers, from your iPhone to your Samsung Galaxy
Mm-hmm.
to whatever,
Yeah.
state of the art, top of the line products are made in China now. That's part of why they're a real threat. But the only reason they got there is because we allowed them to. We didn't have any enforcement. We allowed this to build up over time. We allowed our jobs to go overseas. We didn't do anything to stop this until Trump put the tariffs in place. We allowed our industry to be stolen out from under us.
Yeah. And then I think there was no incentives for our businesses too, as well. We weren't taking care of them as well.
Yeah.
And this is why I think if we did do the board of trade or the board of investments as well, that he probably won't just, have those CEOs that he brought on Air Force One with him, because they're not going to necessarily, I won't say that all of them, but I feel like what you will probably get is more people that are looking out for their own interests and interests of their company versus America first, because that's what you
Yeah.
saw.
And
You saw a little bit of it, under other administrations when they moved their businesses to China and did that, but they really didn't have a much of a choice because we were, the way we had things set up here under past administration. So my thought is, I like what you said, that we're probably going to put in place people that are skeptical. Maybe Marco Rubio, which I think we got a clip from him that we'll play soon, because this is great. Because I think he was. They said that he was banned.
he was
And
banned from China. So there's a few of them that are. Now, I think Rubio's already wearing too many hats, and there's plenty of other people. I would put Gordon Chang or somebody like that like absolutely hates China and understands how they operate. That's the kind of person I would want on that. Maybe not him directly, because that might be a line too far, but somebody with his same mentality, that he understands how they operate, how they think. He really understands the big picture, because China doesn't plan out the next few years like we do. They're looking 50, 100 years in the future. That's one positive thing I can say about them, that we really need to we really do need to emulate that more here, is look more for the long term, less short term planning, and instead have a 50-year plan of what we want to create here.
okay, my thought is that probably Secretary Scott Bessent,
Oh yeah, he'd be
because he's
really good
already
too.
talked about the Board of Trade and he's talked about the non-sensitive goods and things like that with Reuters. He's kind of already on it, like he's already discussing this.
Yes.
I also think U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer, uh, that he might put him on, because Greer's priorities include combating unfair trade practices, expanding market access for made in America products. So I think that he'd probably be, those two would probably be the main ones that he puts on in charge of that.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I just hope he doesn't go with a lot of the people that went over there with him, a lot of the business executives and all that. Unfortunately, I do think a lot of these people are fair weather friends. I know there's a lot of people in the MAGA movement that think, oh, we've won them over, they're on our side now. I really doubt that with a number of them. Now, there are a
Mm-hmm.
few, I certainly think that's true. But
Yeah,
I
I
think a
agree.
lot of these people are fair weather friends. They know right now it is financially beneficial for them to go along with some of these things, but they will be right back in the other camp next time the Democrats have power again, and then they're gonna, go to the camera and say,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I made a mistake," or "We do what we had to do to get through the horrible Trump years." So I wouldn't trust most of them, to be honest, that went over there. But I do
Yeah.
think you can look outside of people immediately in his administration. There's a lot of people that are experts on this that do understand both China's mentality and our mentality, and that we do need to protect our own interests. We need to be America first, but we also do need to be fair. Because if we could establish a much better, more mutually beneficial long-term relationship uh, with China, kind of like we've done with Japan and other countries in the past, that it is in our interest.
Mhm.
Especially if, as part of that, we can prevent them from taking Taiwan.
Yes. um, and I was going to say that I think, let's see, we have those three. So we have Secretary Scott Bessent, Jameson Greer. What are your thoughts on Apple? That was my next question because you mentioned that they're probably, there's some of them that are fair weather friends, but we saw Apple investing tons during this administration, right?
Yeah.
Billions
A-
of dollars.
And trying to skate the tariffs by moving finished products to India and pretending they weren't finished. So I don't think you can trust Apple at all. They've been very pro China. I guess he just stepped down, but the Tim Cook over there, you know, keep in mind, like look at where they spend their personal money too. He was the SPLC's largest donor. So that tells
Mm,
you something about his policy, and I'm sure some of that carries over to the company he operates. Unfortunately, I just don't think Apple is really a friend of the United States, that they are a globalist company. They are very leftist here. And again, it's who they market to, it's who they cater to, or this elitist, that their products are better than whoever's. And that's part of why they charge what they do for them. But yeah, I don't really like Apple or Tim Cook. I don't think that he would be good. I think he would probably try to help China out any way he could, way over the United States.
okay. No, I think some things that are worth watching beyond trade, because there's several major other issues that were also discussed. First, Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, because I think China. They mentioned that China and the U.S. did talk about that, and that they agreed that Iran shouldn't be doing tolls. Second would be Taiwan, right? That's a major point. And then third would be the AI semiconductors and technology restrictions.
Yeah.
Do I need to go into that or?
Um, we can just say, briefly with Taiwan, it's in our interest and the world's interest that they remain independent and are allowed to continue to manufacture some of the world's finest microchips. I know they are building facilities. Taiwan Semiconductor, NVIDIA, and AMD are built in the process of building some facilities in Texas, I believe. Um,
Mhm.
but it's still in the world's interest globally, to have them remain independent. I just lost my train of thought after that. What was the next?
The third one was the AI semiconductors and technology restrictions.
Yeah, I I don't know. I mean, we do need to be very careful because again, we already know China is a country that we cannot trust. That they will sabotage things. They've already stolen huge amounts of AI data and research from various U.S. companies here while it was in development. So I don't know. I have some. I think we need to restrict the flow of processing power to China as much as we possibly can. That it is in our short and long term interest.
Mm. Now, Reuters did put out a report that NVIDIA's H200 AI chips have been approved for export to select Chinese firms, but deliveries had not happened yet, partly because of China's own hesitancy as it pursues chip self sufficiency.
Yes, which that's what we should be doing too. We are starting to, but yeah, we don't want to be dependent on any foreign nation for any key resource,
Yes,
if at all avoidable.
yes,
You know,
I totally 100% agree with that.
yeah. So I mean,
Uh,
China is doing what's best for China's interest, and we should be doing the same thing, especially when it comes to something as essential as processing power.
Agreed. Fourth is a rare earth. I know you talked about this in supply chains.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the one real advantage that China does have right now is, and again, I know it's going to upset some people, but they've gone all over the world and they've made deals. They brought in mining facilities into various countries in Africa and South America. They've been looking at the rare earth minerals for far longer than we have at the U.S., and they've been out ahead of this. So this really is like the one strategic advantage that they really hold. Now, there is good news. We found sources like I guess they just found a lithium source, a potential lithium mine in I think it was West Virginia, might have been Virginia. No, it was West Virginia. Just in the last week, we have deposits they found recently in Arkansas, and I don't know if it was North or South Carolina. So and we have allies that we can buy from there. But it is something we need to be doing a much, 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 much better job of. Also, holding Zelensky accountable. He did end up signing this agreement about the rare earth minerals in the Ukraine. It looks like the war
Mhm.
is finally winding down there. Putin came out of this last meeting they had saying that, you know what, he does think that there's a path to peace now, that there's hope for that the conflict can finally be resolved. So we have to remember, they did sign this deal. We have to hold them accountable, and we just need to have our own supply. Even if China has access to more globally than we do, as long as we have enough to build the products that we need here, then that is sufficient. But yeah, that is the one advantage that they really do hold over us, is they were out ahead of this, collecting rare earth minerals all over the globe. They used the Belt and Road Initiative to get into a lot of these countries, building infrastructure and other things. But that is the one thing that they've been ahead of that we were asleep at the switch on for far too long.
Yeah, agreed. And then we talked about, well, they also mentioned the human rights. So Trump reportedly raised the cases of detained Pastor Jin Mingri and jailed Hong Kong media figure Jimmy Lai. According to Reuters and AP, Trump said she was seriously considering Pastor Jin's case, and but the Jimmy Lai's case was a tough one. Pastor Jin and others were detained during a crackdown on unregistered religious activity, while Jimmy Lai is serving a 20-year sentence. I think he's like 78 years old, tied
Yeah.
to Hong Kong's national security law.
Yeah, and as you and I were kind of discussing on the phone, like what happened in Hong Kong, they were supposed to be able to retain a certain amount of autonomy. That didn't really happen, and that's one of the
Yeah,
fears with Taiwan too, is that they're just going to come in
yeah.
and get crushed.
They've
That
said that they're going to do that, but we've seen them do it in Hong Kong. We've seen them not keep up that the autonomy in Hong Kong. So you can't expect that to be the case for Taiwan.
and I think I might be conflating a few different cases when you're talking about Jimmy Lai, because a lot of this went down a while back with him. I'm definitely conflating a few different people here, but a lot of it, it was activists that were speaking out that were essentially trying to get China to hold to their original agreement with the UK when Hong Kong was handed back over, and obviously that didn't happen. But it really is
Yeah.
just silencing free speech. But at the same time, you don't have free speech in China. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
good. We should push for their changing their laws, softening their policy, but internally they're really going the opposite direction. I've been watching more and more about just how scary um, their ID system and everything else is, with people, if you park in the wrong spot, then all of a sudden you find out you're locked out of buying certain grocery items for the next week. This system they have of total monetary control, the digital ID. And unfortunately, like, their system is already basically complete, and they're starting to roll this out in the UK, Canada, Australia, other countries throughout Europe. And the Democrats just filed a bill within the last week to bring digital ID here to the U.S. too.
Hmm.
So,
So I
and
do have a. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, I mean, encouraging China to back away from these type of totalitarian systems, allow people to have a certain amount of freedom and not gamifying everything to the way they are right now. I think that would be in our interest and the world's interest, and ultimately in their interest, because I think a system like this can only be in place for so long before people finally rebel. They've had enough. That people that, like, one of the interviews I was watching with a guy that normally tried to participate, do everything that he was encouraged to, be a good citizen, use the correct talking points this week when he posts on social media, and he made some silly little mistake, and then he wasn't able to ride the train anymore, and then that created a cascade to where he couldn't get to work on time. Then he had more points docked, and a lot of these globalists in the EU are looking at systems like this and salivating because of the level of control it'll give them over citizens and
Hmm.
silencing dissent.
Yeah.
We need to shut that down permanently here. And John Thune is already standing in the way of that in the Senate here. But he's directly said he doesn't want to get involved in any of this. He's not going to ban central bank digital currencies or anything else. But this is what they're using there. And that's something that I do think we should include, put massive pressure on China to dismantle that system. Not that they will, but at least put our
Yeah.
foot down there and
Hmm.
try.
I mean, the only person that could do that would be President Trump,
Yeah.
or at least right now. I mean, if Marco Rubio gets elected, then maybe. But I'm sure he
Yeah.
wouldn't hesitate to do what he wants to do, do there, because he's already been very critical of China.
Yeah.
Um, there, before we move on to the next discussion, and I know we're going crazy on time because we just dissected this whole summit. But before we move on to the next one, I want to get into Zerama. a little bit and let you chime in on it because I know you have a lot on that. And I also am concerned about where New York City is headed. But I want to leave us with this video from Marco Rubio. I believe we have a clip where there was I think it was
Yeah,
NBC,
NBC News.
yeah, NBC News that did an interview with Secretary Marco Rubio when they were in Beijing. And this starts from when the first question he asked him is about the presidential election for 2028. So let's play that.
Here we go.
I don't know if you were watching the president on Monday, but he was at the podium and he was maybe making a joke, but he was surveying the audience. And I know you're Secretary of State. You don't like to talk about your political future. But he asked a group of supporters to clap if they liked Vice President J.D. Vance or if they liked you better. It sounded like it was pretty even. What do you think about that? Would you want to be president?
No, look, I know this is going to sound like the typical job. I'm going to be in this job for the next 2.5 years. I'm going to do that job. I'm going to finish the job for this president. I'm enjoying it very much. I think we're going to make a lot of good things happen. JD is a very good friend of mine. If JD runs for president, I think he'd be a phenomenal candidate. I've said publicly, and I'll say it again, I'll be the first person to sign up and support him. I think JD would do great.
Would you want to be a vice president?
I want to be the Secretary of State, and I'll worry about the future in the future. I'm not saying, I'm not telling you that that's what I'm aiming for. I've been doing this for a long time, too. I was in the Senate starting in 2010, so I'd like to do some other things with my life at some point, although public service is an honor to be able to be involved in.
Okay. I do want to ask you, because we did so much reporting on Chinese EVs, there's two arguments against Chinese EVs in the U.S. One, from automakers, it'll cripple the industry because they're so cheap. But elected leaders have also said it's an issue of national security. Do you truly believe if China's EVs come to the U.S., it's an issue of national security?
Yes, because it'll wipe out an industry. Because it's not just the EV, it's all of the other things that go into making them, all the other components of it that are related to other industries as well. But ask the Europeans. The Europeans right now, their EV model, they're being flooded with Chinese EVs. It is wiping out their industry over there. So again, we already have a lot of critical vulnerabilities. There are already things we rely on in our economy where we get 95% of it or 85% of it from China. That's a vulnerability. We can't continue to allow it to expand to other fields.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary, we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
He must be a great person to interview because he's very concise and he talks really fast. So you can probably get a bunch of questions in.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, he's exactly right, and I do like how he kind of dances around the next presidential ticket because
they all do.
Well, yeah, and I don't blame them. I think a lot of the people in the media, that's their big business cycle, our election year, especially presidential election years. That's when all of a sudden their ratings go way, way up, and they are been in the toilet since the last election. They lost the trust of the general public. They're desperate to get eyeballs back at NBC and other places. But I also think he's right. Him and Marco Rubio are friends. It isn't like and I don't think they're, fake friends like a lot of politicians. I think they are, legitimately get along. I do think we probably are going to see, I don't know who's going to be on the top of the ticket or who's going to be the VP candidate, but I think it's very likely.
He's gaining.
Well, yeah. And, I think they would make a good team regardless, but I also think having a primary with both of them on stage, it would be sort of the iron sharpens iron thing that, they're not going to be that out of alignment with each other, but I don't know, maybe Marco Rubio's got better ideas on XYZ, and then JD Vance has a better policy for this or something more people like, and then hopefully they, with the best one rises to the top, that's who's on top of the ticket, and then they incorporate the good ideas from both of them. Same with anybody else that runs.
I think they'd be good together because Marco Rubio seems more the type that's more global, like geopolitical.
Yeah.
And well versed in that. And not saying that JD Vance isn't, but he does seem to focus more domestically. Like he really cares about manufacturers. He cares about, our workers and, that whole sect. And you saw that in the beginning of the Trump administration. He was constantly on stage speaking to these manufacturers, to the those that were in that sector of our economy. Like that was his big thing.
Yeah.
So,
well, the other thing is, when you have a bunch of different people vying for the position like that, like during the primary season, that's when sometimes you have good ideas or policy comes out, and then it is kind of absorbed in. We saw this both times that or all three times really, but in 2016 when Trump ran, and again in 2024, we saw other people that shared the stage. Some of their ideas got moved forward or incorporated into his policy once he was declared the winner. I mean, Rand Paul in 2016, a lot of what he brought up was about the trade imbalance with China and other countries around the world, and that became a big part of Trump's platform later. After the debates and all that. And in the last election cycle, you can look at some of the things that Ron DeSantis talked about and brought up. And same thing, once the fight's over, some of that gets incorporated into the platform because you go with the best ideas. And sometimes an opponent in a race, even if it's a friendly opponent, some of what they say is going to resonate more. Their look on something is going to resonate more with the American people, or they have a better take on something, or even just a more concise way to put the same thing. So, again, we want the best person to rise to the top. What we don't want is what the Democrats are doing, where a bunch of elites in a cigar smoke filled back room make the decision. Suddenly, Bernie Sanders drops out of the race, so Hillary Clinton can be the candidate, or Joe Biden completely gets wiped out in a debate, and then they just airdrop in Kamala Harris, and nobody's supposed to have noticed.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, God help California right now.
Oh my gosh.
They're running for governor. Lord. Let's get into Zoran Mondani. We have a clip from his ad that he dropped that I want us to play, and I want that clip to stop before my commentary. So I'll just give you a signal.
Give me the signal. All right, here we go.
$12 billion budget deficit. We are speaking about a fiscal crisis at the scale greater than the Great Recession. Was the Great Recession? Great Recession. Many said the only way out of this was slashing services and passing an austerity budget. We rejected that. After months of painstaking work, that deficit is now zero. Our city is now on firm financial ground.
I knew something was wrong with this ad the moment Mondani claimed. Oh gosh, this guy is such a liar.
What kills, before we even get into what he says, but what kills me about him and so many of these other people, like this other little socialist, whatever her name is, over in Seattle right now, is the media does not push back on any of this stuff.
No.
Zero. They just pretend it's all just fine. They don't even ask a question about it.
You literally have to look up, I had to do my research. I'm like, there's hardly anyone covering or like you mentioned, pushing back. It's not that they're not covering, they're not pushing back. They're not telling you, oh, look at Illinois and look at these other states that have tried that same thing. And look at, them taking the pension and pushing us down the road, what has actually cost their citizens. They don't, you literally have to look and do your research intently to find the opposition to this type of economic strategy, that it doesn't work. And if Mondani was, I would say if he was a real leader, like someone who actually cared about, the city of New York, because I feel like he has a different agenda than what he's portraying. Then you would do like what Governor DeSantis does. I don't know if you've seen his interview with Hoover Institute, but he talked about how the one key thing I pulled from that was he talked about how he did his own research. So for example, when it came to COVID, he didn't just take the word of even Dr. Fauci or even people in the administration. He did his own research. And what he said in that interview was that the research did not add up to what they were saying. And he would talk to scientists and other health gurus about, should kindergartners be wearing masks all day? And they would say no. And he said that because it didn't add up, he was willing to take the heat to protect his citizens. That's a real leader. And you see those conservative policies doing very well for his economy in Florida. But then, with Mondani, he could have easily, just like I mentioned, looked at Illinois. Of course, New York is nowhere near Detroit, but New Jersey, right? You can look at all of these places that have done the exact same thing you are proposing. And where has it led that state? I'm going to let you get in there about the pensions and all that. It's crazy.
Well, yeah, let's take it back to COVID. He has probably the best Surgeon General in the country, Dr. Joseph Ladapo. He's awesome down there in Florida. But yeah, same thing, because I don't know if we're talking about the same interview, but we're probably not, because this one was a little while back when they were questioned directly about COVID. He's like, oh yeah, I didn't just take what he handed me and go with it. We went and double checked it. We said, but his ideas are what made sense. He brought statistics and data in saying that, that the few lives that it might save, shutting down the entire state would not offset the number of lives that we lost. You have the economy in the state just completely collapsed, like you'd had happen in California and other places where they just shut down and surrendered to the virus. And We're pouring sand in swimming pools and blocking basketball courts, arresting people that went out to the beach. Like, none of that makes any sense. Especially, again, if you're in a, but yeah, DeSantis has the right idea. It isn't just, I'm going to take the narrative and I'm going to run with it. We're just going to get our talking points from whoever. No, we're going to go look into things. We're going to do what's right for us. We're going to put Florida first. And this really is the path that every single governor should take. That they
It's a
should do
lot
is,
of work. Yeah, and he talked about, I don't know if we're talking about the same interview. However, we're on the same page.
well,
He
I was
talked
just
about
wanted to reference COVID. That was an older interview, but otherwise I know the one you're talking about. So sorry, go ahead.
it's good. He also talked about the major pushback he got because of that too, like the slander and all of that.
Yep.
And the projection, they said what happened to the state as a result of what he was implementing that wasn't following what everyone else was doing. And then it turned out being completely different. And what I constantly saw was that anytime he would get a report to do something, he did his research.
Yeah.
Like, amazing leadership. Like, he didn't just sit there as governor and he could have just taken the narrative that was being spun, but he literally shut all that noise out and did what was best for his citizens after doing the clear research of what was actually taking place. And that wasn't not just with COVID, but with every single thing we're looking at right now.
Yes.
So, that made his state be more prosperous, and businesses are leaving California and going over to Florida, and even when it comes to the state income tax and what we're seeing across these other states, for example, Illinois and New Jersey, and what we will see in New York is that, I think New York is already showing it, but the higher taxes on the citizens because of the poor policies you're putting in place. Like, this is going to mean higher taxes, higher property taxes, service cuts. We're looking at like library closures and all those fundamental things that help the society thrive. We're talking about infrastructure suffering. You're not going to have enough money to handle potholes and things like that. Like, you're looking at a downward economy that's going to affect the citizens heavily because of your decision to do this right now. You're just literally kicking a can down the road, and that we've seen that repeated in other states, and you could just take the example of that and say this doesn't work.
Yeah, well, they don't admit to failure. Democrats fail upwards. That's why Gavin Newsom is running for president right now, despite the condition that he's left California in. But to your point, like, you can't borrow from future generations like Mamdani's doing right now to cover today's debt. Yeah, that may work short term, but again, like you said, look to Illinois. Right now, Illinois has a $450 billion budget shortfall and unfunded liabilities in the future. This is pension funds. They've robbed Peter to pay Paul. There is zero possibility that they are going to pay back this debt. Right now they're as much as doubling, sometimes more than that, property taxes both on individuals and on companies. And when you have punitive taxes like this, where you're punishing success, people leave. And this is what Zoran the Moron, Katie Wilson, and others always fail to consider, or they pretend it's not a problem. I mean, everybody saw the Katie Wilson clip of her going, "Oh, I keep hearing millionaires and billionaires are leaving. I think that's overblown, but my real thoughts on it are buy," or something like that, to paraphrase her. That doesn't work. When your state revenue, like, I covered an article about a week ago that in California alone, like, trillions of dollars in revenue have left that state in the last 2 years, of people leaving with their personal wealth, large corporations leaving, saying, "I've had it with these punitive taxes where you're punishing us for being here. We're going to Texas. We're going to Florida. We're going to Tennessee." Because, at the end of the day, it isn't the government's wealth. It's privately generated. They rely, but they act like you're their personal piggy bank to fund whatever pet project they want. And again, in New York, a lot of these are also bad. Like opening these grocery stores, the other things that Mamdani's promised, the free buses, all that. I mean, it's all going to lead to more problems, more calamities. They are already starting to see the effect of it. I mean, I just find it unbelievable that he's out there pretending he's solved all these problems and budgeting issues. Even if we just go to the snow removal and trash removal, that the snow removal was an absolute disaster in New York through this last winter, and they all know it. They still are having problems with the garbage removal right now, and he's pretending it's solved. But this goes to the core. One of the core fundamental problems that our country faces right now is the media failing to do their job, that they are not there to push back, to question politicians, to bring their viewers the truth. What they are there to do is further a specific political agenda and reinforce a narrative for these globalist leftists and undocumented Democrats in the Republican Party.
Now, guys, if you're watching, I would definitely encourage you to read the CBC, which is the Citizens Budget Commission, because this talked about the effects that Mondami's policies would have on the state. And these are actual experts within that state giving this account of what would take place with the next generation and how it's going to affect them based on what he's doing. He's making the budget look like it's gone on paper, but in reality, he's just basically kicking the can down the road. So I encourage you to read that because that's one of the sources that will give you a lot more insight into that. I pulled from that too when it came to his ad, because I'm like, this doesn't seem right. You literally conquered $12 billion in a few months, and you're crediting the state. You're crediting So I had to do my own research because it didn't make sense. But Mike, when we were talking Thursday, you mentioned this, and I thought this was so profound. You said that and I'm kind of paraphrasing you so you can clear this up, but you said that the government what they will do, like especially with a lot with the Democrat ran economies in states, because they favor socialism and the people relying on the government, what they'll do is they'll put the people in a position where they have to rely on the government.
Yep.
And then try to make it look like they're the savior. They're the person bailing them out with these social programs, but literally they are the ones who actually put them there in the first place. But the people are not necessarily in a place where they understand all of those nuances within that.
Or even when they do understand them, sometimes they get trapped. That's the problem with a lot of these social programs. And this isn't anything new. We talk about this all the time with different communities. We talk about how a lot of what happened in the Great Society programs or during the Civil Rights Movement, that the negative net effect was what destroyed black families and black households. When all of a sudden you had to kick dad out of the picture to get your full benefit from the government, you're now breaking up the family. Now, this isn't that per se, but a lot of these policies are the same thing. It is political hostage taking. You're making them entirely reliant on the government. Everything comes from government. All bounties come from government, not from private industry. You can't pick yourself up by your own bootstraps. They make it impossible to start your own small business and be successful there due to overregulation and everything else. They tax you to oblivion. And they hold you back. And even the crime, I think that's part of it too. I think they want people scared. They want them feeling unsafe. They want the solutions to be
defunding the police, which the police, that staffing will be affected when we look at what's taking place in New York. He already talked about defunding them anyways, but it's going to be affected. Even when we look at emergency services, all of that is affected when we talk about the pension. So, it's going to be horrible.
It is. And I do think it does, unfortunately, lock us. There is a percentage of our population that this locks them in. They focus on Mamdani. He basically becomes their savior. He has all the answers. They're relying on him to get crime down, to protect them and everything else. And it's almost like you have to be abused so much before they'll finally break and admit that there's a problem. And this is what I think we see happening in LA with Spencer Pratt right now. Mm-hmm. That he's out there just calling this stuff out, this sheer lunacy that's gone on in LA for decades now. But he's not afraid to call it what it is. And he doesn't care what names they call him or anything else, because none of those are true anyway. They're just a way to obfuscate from the problem. Try to say, don't listen to Spencer Pratt. He's a xenophobe, or he's a racist, or he's whatever.
Yeah, racism is the main thing they run to. Every single, and I thought it was kind of like a rhetoric, because I remember Candace Owens saying this.
Yeah.
And she was right. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with what she's doing right now, guys, so don't take it that way. But she was right in those other instances.
Back in the day, she had a laser focus. She had this ability to point to things that were going on like that and sum it up in a way that everybody understood, that put it right into focus. And I think Spencer Pratt's done that. Like him pointing out that a bunch of degenerate crackheads are stealing all the copper wire on whatever bridge it was in LA, and that's why none of the lights are on. Yeah. Well, he got called a racist because of that. I'm not even sure what race he was offending, but whatever. He's apparently a racist for pointing out that rather than putting the people in cages that have been stealing the lights and stealing the copper wire and everything else, that they're going to put cages around the lights. They're going to put the lights in jail.
And steal it again,
Yeah, I mean, it's just
go after the criminal. That's the issue. That is the issue. The person that's on the street doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. And there's another thing that's been popping up. This statistic that I've seen a few different politicians and other people talk about it. But a lot of these major cities, the vast majority of your violent crime that happens, it's 0.02% of the population. It's a few hundred people committing the bulk of the violent crime. Lock these people up, throw away the key. They cannot be part of civil society. We are going to have some sort of rule where if you are a repeat violent offender, we stop letting you out. That at
Yeah.
some point, I don't know if it's the old three-strike policy that they used to have or something.
'Cause we've
Um,
seen that it's very dangerous to continue let these people out on the streets when they're suffering mentally, or like we saw that woman on the train.
yeah,
Was that in North Carolina?
yeah, Irina Zarutska.
Yeah,
But yeah,
very sad.
yeah, or this other guy that set the lady on fire in Chicago on the L train. He'd been released from prison. I don't know if it was 77 or 78 times. And a lot of it was theft and small scale stuff, which is again what the media points to. Well, half of his offenses weren't violent. Yeah, well, I don't know. I still consider like retail robbery, especially if you're part of a stick up
Well,
crew.
how did they write it off? Number one, because we saw a lot of that in Washington where they were coding things differently to make the crime scene lesser when it wasn't. So I think that's
True.
something to look into as well.
Yeah.
But of course,
Yeah.
media won't do that if it paints a certain narrative and makes the Democrat state look like it's still glorious.
Yeah.
It's wild.
I mean, yeah, and then having that mentality that leads also to what I said earlier with the hostage situation. If you're going to keep releasing violent criminals onto the street, you're holding the city hostage. But like Spencer Pratt saying there, as opposed to Zoran Mamdani, are the ones that keep breaking the law. They're not going to learn a lesson. That doesn't mean you can't have some mercy. If somebody's like legitimately stealing food somewhere and the judge wants to give them a sentence on the low end because they have no criminal record before that, they're go in there, plead their case, they're suffering poverty, it was a flash decision. There's a time for a judge to have some mercy. Maybe instead of putting that person in jail for 3 years, they're a first time offender, you give them 3 months and some probation, and then try to connect them with programs that'll get them on their feet and make sure this never happens again. But if this person's in front of you for the 19th time, I saw this video with this shoplifting lady on TikTok. Have you seen the one where the judge is reading through the rap sheet and she just can't believe how many times this lady's been arrested for shoplifting? The judge is this older black woman, and she keeps saying, I can't remember the phrase she's using, but this is like the 70th time this lady's been arrested for shoplifting. And at the end, she's basically like, how are you out of jail? Why is it that it took you getting before me to get you a serious sentence? And I guess she gives her the maximum, so that's where the outrage came from. But she's exactly right. If this lady her job is she is a career shoplifter. That may be a petty crime in some people's opinion, but when it happens 65, 70 times over the course of 5 years, something's got to be done. Somebody's not learning a lesson. When you talk about like retail businesses closing and leaving, it's people like this that cause it.
Yeah. Now, one thing I've been studying more deeply lately is how, when we look at Zohran Mamdani mentioned, like, I don't believe that his intentions are exactly what he's saying when it comes to the state of New York, especially with the other pieces of the rhetoric and where he stands when it comes to Hamas and all the other things. So I've been studying the Islamist political movements and historically how they have gained influence in regions where governments were weak, corrupt, unstable, and failing. And usually, and for example, you have the Muslim Brotherhood is one, Hamas is another one. And what they do is they infiltrate where they see that there is a failing government or a weak government. And then they move their political movement, and it's not just ideology as we understand nowadays. It's literally a political movement. So, and many of them function as a combination of a political movement, political warfare provider, religious authority, and a community organizer. So they do all those things. And what we saw with Hamas and in Gaza is that they were promising all of these things that the other regime wasn't giving them, or the other government wasn't giving them. And so the people overwhelmingly elect them, even though they're like deaf to Israel, or it's like they were suffering. So they're like they were promising all of this, but in turn, again, that was a weak government, and they were able to infiltrate those ranks and get the people to believe that they were literally for them and going to change this and do that. Even with the rhetoric against Israel, most of the Palestinians are, they went ahead and elected Hamas, right? And then that was to their detriment. And you see this historically with the Muslim Brotherhood too. They built influence through schools, clinics, charities, and professional associations and welfare networks. And in areas where people felt abandoned by corrupt or ineffective government, the Brotherhood could step in and say, we are the ones helping the people while the government fails you. And this gave them legitimacy and political influence, and that's, you see a similar thing happening. Yeah, I'm just looking at Zohran Mamdani because, like I said, I don't think his motives are just pure. Again, they crush the people, making them really rely on the government to provide for them and give everything. And then they're just in this place where Again, when we saw, with Hamas, it's like they're relying on Hamas to do all this, and they're just poor, they're helpless, and they're in an economy that's dead, and not beneficial for the people. And so I think there, like I mentioned, there's a different alternative. And if you have, like, Mondami's already mentioned that he wants to tax the wealthy, right? And there's reports that some of these businesses plan on leaving New York because of what's taking place economically, and how Mondami plans to leave New York City. So if that's his case, and most of these people are leaving because of the high this and the high that, and it's already a growing Muslim community, I think we need to be
Right.
watching closely what takes
Y-
place.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I really like what you said too, making the connection to like how Hamas and Hezbollah have operated overseas, where they will publicly be like a charity almost. They're the ones distributing food. They
And
try
Hezbollah.
to, yeah, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, a lot of these groups. That's how they function. And again, our media, Western media, falls for it. They pretend, oh, this is just a political movement. They just want to help the people. They ignore all the obvious signs that it isn't what it is.
Mhm.
But, and I do think you're going to see more of this in New York. But yeah, it's already kind of presenting himself that way. Well, at the same time, I know a lot of people. I'm sure you saw this other address from Gracie Mansion, where it was essentially inviting more people to join Islam, using his bully pulpit to push his religious views out. Just a few days ago, we're going to see more of it, and we're going to see more of this. It's the red green axis. Annie Cyrus has been warning people about this stuff for decades
Yes.
now, and we are seeing it here in the U.S. I think
Mhm.
New York. I think it's a toss up between which area is more dangerous right now to America as a whole. Zoran Mamdani and his leadership there, or what's going on in Texas with Epic City. The reason I say it's a toss up is because in Texas we see a lot of these Republicans going along with it too, and they're becoming part of this movement down there. And I think
Mhm.
mostly it's for financial reasons,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
the
Where
governor is doing a good job pushing back, though, from what I've seen.
and Paxton, they've both done a good job. But you've had a lot of the other judges and other local politicians, and that's what makes people like Annie and I scared is when you see a lot of these people on the right going along with it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
That's why you can't necessarily follow Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly, because they're not really. I don't know what their aim is, or what's going on with them. They were not reliable voices.
I guess
Um,
I'm more concerned a lot of the big money donors and people like that on the right that are falling for this because that's who's going to fund the voices than to people that are actually in office. That's who's
mm,
going to make the big
yeah,
impact financially. And again, it takes money to win these seats, and everybody knows, the power players are the kingmakers.
yeah. So that also, I'm glad you brought that up, because guys, we do our Inez Cyrus, because we do have the Aisha Speaks Truth Club. I want to encourage you guys to subscribe so you can be a part of that community. We will be meeting. We were supposed to meet this past Wednesday, but Inez had a little issue with her. I think it was
Some
her
technical
technology, her
difficulties with their
she had a
laptop.
lot of technical difficulties. So, and I really wanted to have her on, and she really wanted to be a part of it. So she asked me if I could extend it a few days. And so we are going to do this month's meeting on Monday, this coming Monday, 7 to 8 p.m. ET. So I encourage you to subscribe. Make sure you be a part of that. She's going to be breaking down her book, Architecture of Jihad. Now, and everything I mentioned about the Islamist political movement, Hezbollah and stuff, that little snippet I just gave you guys, there's so much more that I've studied. But just for the sake of time, just give you a little bit of what I know, just to throw it out there and have you guys also pay attention to the same thing. But she breaks this down in detail in her book, Architecture of Jihad. And I love that this woman, she's an expert, and she's an Iranian expert. And I love that, I never tell her what questions I'm going to have her. I kind of like you. I just say, this is what we're going to talk about. But with her, she's just like, don't tell me the questions ahead of time. I don't want to know anything. Just when we're there, we're there. And this woman just flows. Like, you just know that this is her field. Like,
Yes.
she's good at it. You can throw any questions at her when it comes to the Middle East, Iran, Israel, etc. And this girl, she knows her history. She can bring you to the historical point and point to you why she made this conclusion. She can give you the jurisprudence. She's amazing. So when we had our first meeting with her, she was taking questions from all these people that were asking questions in the group, and it was very awesome. I really enjoyed it. We're meet in a private Zoom, so that way you can have access to me and to her. She is the expert. She comes, she's willing to take all your questions about it and then teach you how to prepare when it comes to this. And the one thing I love how she goes about this, she's a Christian, and she doesn't swing this as you got to be skeptical of every single Muslim you see. She breaks it down very differently. So you understand the ideology, you can understand how do we protect America and our values, and we hold tight to that. And she goes through all that and breaks down like what we need to look for. And the funny thing is her book really hits into what I've seen things happening on the news. Like I've been able to bring to her news articles of sleeper cells or decentralized cells, which she mentions in the book, which I've never heard of before. And so in the book, she talks about decentralized cells where these Islamist groups were, and these are like the radical groups in Islam. They will basically try to radicalize people from within a country who are native of that country, and how they do that. It's so interesting. This war on social media and how they start these multiple accounts, and they make it look like they are actually in Texas or Florida, and they're an American citizen, but they're really in a different country in the Middle East, pretending to spread this division. And when you have multiple accounts doing that same thing, the algorithm catches on to that and just starts to push it. And then you have a lot of people consuming this information thinking that it's actually an American person, and it's literally not. So she breaks that down too in the book, and it's just really, really interesting to see how you can pinpoint those things that the mainstream media really isn't covering. So if you want to be part of those conversations, I encourage you to come in. We can see this thing happening in our nation. So don't turn a blind eye to it and think that it's because it's not in your state yet, or you might think it's not in your state yet, that it's not taking place. So this conversation is very eye-opening. I encourage you guys to be part of it as well. And yeah, so Aisha Speak Truth, you can, I think that's in the show notes. You guys can click on that. The subscription is on Facebook. So if you're watching via YouTube or any other platform, come back to my Facebook. There you can subscribe and be a part of the community, and you can get all the resources you need to prep for that meeting we have on Monday.
Which I am planning on attending as well. I just got to double check one thing, but I should be able to be there.
Awesome. I'd love to have you. Yeah, so I think for the sake of time, we can wrap up here. But this is very insightful. So there's so much more to discuss when it comes to the Trump administration and everything that's taking place in our world. But for the sake of time, we'll divulge there. Mike, I do want to thank you so much for being a part of the conversation today and bringing in all of your insight, because I know you've been keeping tabs on every single thing taking place, and I appreciate that. So I do want to close us out in prayer, and then I want to share with you guys. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. So let's just pray. God, we just thank you for this time. I bless this nation, Lord. I thank you that you've called us for such a time as this, that we can use this platform to reach people and to share these different insights, God. And I just pray for unity among the United States. I pray for unity within the party. Like we just seen right now with the COVID situation, that Senate hearing, that there were no Democrats there to even be a part of that hearing. God, we just declare for more unity to take place, God, that we would be central on these themes. And we ask that you would rid us of corruption and all the things that could tear this nation down. And I pray that, God, we continue to be a global leader. We continue to lead, and we continue to have the foundations of the Judeo-Christian values within this nation as we started. And Lord, I thank you right now for Mike. I thank you for Ex America News. I pray, God, that it continues to be blessed and continue to reach ears and have the financial footing that it needs. And God, we just thank you for the opportunity to be able to be in such a great nation, Lord, with among great people. And we just pray that you bless this nation, bless our 250th anniversary event that'll be coming up, and bless President Trump. Please protect his life, protect the administration and everyone involved in the administration. And I thank you so much for thwarting all plans that the enemy put in place against Donald Trump's life. And I thank you, God, that you surround him with your angels, that you surround the White House, his family, in the name of Jesus. And pray this. Amen.
Amen.
Hey, guys, join us next week, Saturday, 2 to 3 p.m. ET. I believe we will have Dr. Sam Cohen, who is running for congressman here in South Carolina. He actually emailed me today about getting on the podcast, just to confirm. I was supposed to have Congressman Norman, but he didn't respond to my last text message. I know he told me he would be traveling from Aiken to Columbia. I don't want to rule him out as standing me up or ghosting me, because he's been very, very the past interactions I've had with him, he's been very open. Like I even have his personal cell phone number, and he's been texting me back and forth, and he answered my call when I call and stuff. So I just wonder if it's just him getting wrapped up and busy and not having the time to get back to me. I don't know. Okay. But we'll see how that what happens with that. But Dr. Salmon Cohen is wanting to come on. He is awesome. He is a millionaire, and I bring that up so you guys have a little bit of context about him. He's bidding his own campaign, and I think I love the values he holds. He is a Christian man, and he's extremely humble, very very humble, and he has a lot of great policies and things he sees happening within our state in South Carolina. He wants to share that with you guys, and I want to definitely give him more exposure because I feel like people like him in our state, they are not giving them the viewership that they deserve. I feel like every single candidate, whether I agree with them or not, or you agree with them, they should be heard so that people can decide, because that's how we run this republic.
Yeah.
And so it's just not unfair for the establishment to do that to candidates that are running, especially ones that are paying their own way. So yeah, he's gonna be coming on. Yeah, and then Mike, you'll get a chance to meet him too. Definitely want to introduce
Awesome.
you guys.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us, and I hope to see you all next week. Bye for now.